your verifying homework. So the first thing we talked about doing in our notes is rewriting everything in terms of sine and cosine. So this could be written, we have the cosine of x equals cotangent. Cotangent is the cosine of x over the sine of x divided by cosecant 1 over the sine of x. So when we divide fractions, we multiply by the reciprocal. So the left side is still the cosine of x. Cosine of x divided by the sine of x times the reciprocal sine of x over 1. So sine of x over sine of x reduces down to 1. So we're left with the cosine of x equals the cosine of x, and we've verified it. So the second one, again, let's rewrite everything in terms of sine and cosine. Tangent, so we have the sine of a over the cosine of a, equals secant 1 over the cosine of a divided by 1 over the sine of a. So the left side, we still have the sine of a over the cosine of a. In this right side, if we multiply by the reciprocal, that would be the sine of a over 1. Multiply fractions straight across, we're left with the sine of a over the cosine of a, which is what the left side is. So the third one here, so we have the cosine of theta equals the sine of theta times cotangent cosine of theta over sine of theta. Those would reduce down to 1. So we're left with the cosine of theta on that side, which is what we want. The fourth one, so let's keep rewriting here. Sine of theta 1 over the cosine of theta times the cotangent cosine of theta over sine of theta equals 1. Cosine, cosine, sine, sine, so we're left with 1 equals 1. The next one here, cosecant 1 over the sine of theta times the cosine of theta times tangent sine of theta over cosine of theta equals 1. So cosine, cosine, sine, sine, so we're left with 1 equals 1. Sine of x times tangent sine of x over cosine of x equals 1 over the cosine of x minus the cosine of x. Well, one thing I noticed here, let's see, we have fractions, so the left side is sine squared of x over cosine of x. Well, this right side, we need to add fractions, we need a common denominator, so times the cosine of x over the cosine of x. So that's really by multiplying by the number 1. So now we have 1 over the cosine of x minus cosine squared of x over the cosine of x. So we have a common denominator. So our common denominator on this right side is the cosine of x. The numerator would be 1 minus the cosine squared of x. So if our denominators are the same, so then our numerators have to be the same. So we have sine squared of x equals 1 minus the cosine squared of x. And if we were to rewrite this, we have sine squared of x plus cosine squared of x equals 1, which is the Pythagorean identity. And the last one here, number 7. So let's see, we got the cosine of x plus the sine of x times tangent sine of x over cosine of x equals the secant 1 over the cosine of x. So this is going to be similar to the last one. We have the cosine of x plus sine squared of x over the cosine of x equals 1 over the cosine of x. So if we have to have a common denominator, multiply this one by cos over cos. So now we have cos squared of x over the cosine of x plus sine squared of x over the cosine of x equals 1 over the cosine of x. Okay, so common denominator, cosine of x. Numerator, cos squared of x plus sine squared of x equals 1 over the cosine of x. So our numerators have to be the same since our denominators are the same. And we know that this is the Pythagorean identity. So cos squared plus sine squared equals 1.